What is going on, everybody? Today's video, as you can see, is going to be a little bit different. The 2023 NFL Draft is around a week away, so I have decided to put the draft into Madden 23 to see what the game thinks is going to happen during this year's draft. Then we're going to simulate 20 years into the future to see which players go on to have really good careers. As you guys all probably know, I'm a huge draft nerd. I used to make draft content on this channel, but I don't really do that anymore because I have put all of it onto a second channel called Octi's Draft Talks. The link is in the description if you want to check it out. I do mock drafts and whatnot over there. I also have a podcast with a friend of mine, so if that seems interesting to you, then I recommend you go and check it out with all the content I have planned over the next week or so over there, with the draft obviously coming. So for our first order of business, I had to make a coach name, and I wanted to make a pun related to one of the draft prospects. I was going to do Ojulari likes his BJs, but the game didn't allow that, which I guess is pretty understandable. So instead, we have Will Levis's Mayo Coffee. If you know, you know. Will Levis is a freak, and that means more things than one. So now we have to download a draft class. I did some digging. I wanted to find one where the players' draft stocks were pretty accurate to where they are now, and I ultimately chose the Falcons ATL 2023 draft. So this is what it looks like. I know Will Levis at 2 feels a little bit crazy, but Will Levis is currently the betting favorite to be the number 2 overall pick. So I would say that's realistic enough. And then the rest of this draft class, you can easily nitpick a few small things, but for the most part, I think the order of these players is pretty accurate. So let's get started now. The Carolina Panthers have traded up for the number 1 pick. Presumably, the pick is going to be Bryce Young. I think he's minus 1,200 to be the pick. So in other words, it's a foregone conclusion that he is going to be the selection. But does Madden agree? No. Madden has Carolina picking Will Levis. Okay. Yeah, EA is having us start off with a bang. It would not be Madden without the top team doing something hilariously stupid. So that's what Carolina does here at number 1. The Texans, probably everybody in that draft room is running like a maniac because their guy falls to 2. And Bryce Young is the pick here to the Texans, a no-brainer. I think it's pretty clear that the Texans really want to pick him. So they get lucky having him fall to number 2. That'll bring us to Arizona at number 3. They can't really trade back because the game doesn't really do many draft day trades. So the Cardinals instead are going to pull a fast one on us and draft C.J. Stroud, the quarterback out of Ohio State. And this is a pretty weird pick for obvious reasons. They just gave Kyler Murray a huge contract extension. He is currently injured and on IR, so I don't know if the game recognizes that he is on the team, even though he's not on the active roster, which if the game doesn't recognize that, then that's pretty stupid. So unfortunately for C.J. Stroud, the first 4 years of his career will be wasted away in Arizona. But I guess every other Cardinals draft pick over the last few years has had their career wasted by Arizona as well. Will Anderson goes to the Colts at 4. This is weird because, well, I don't think I've ever seen Will Anderson go to the Colts in a mock draft. If the Colts don't like any of the quarterbacks on the board, in this case Anthony Richardson, then I guess it is possible, although unlikely. Seattle at 5 selects Jalen Carter. Finally, something reasonable. It took us 5 picks. This one makes a lot of sense. I'm hoping he falls to the Lions at 6, but I think Seattle's going to have a hard time passing up on arguably the most talented player on the draft. So that brings up the Lions. They pick Tyree Wilson, which as a Lions fan, I'd be fine with. Personally, I really want Anthony Richardson. I think he can be a game changer at the quarterback position, and I understand Jared Goff is coming off a good season, and if we pass on Richardson to clearly build around Goff, then I would be cool with it. But I think Anthony Richardson, with our offensive coordinator and our skill position players and our offensive line, he could turn into an elite quarterback. So that's why I really want him. But again, I'd be good with Tyree Wilson. I'd probably prefer one of the corners. I think Christian Gonzalez and Devin Witherspoon are a little bit better prospects. But I can't say I'd be that upset with this selection. I know a lot of people really like him for his length, athleticism, and upside. The Raiders with the 7th pick get Anthony Richardson. I don't think they will draft a quarterback, but I wouldn't put it past them. Obviously, Jimmy Garoppolo, you can upgrade, so I don't think that's the craziest thing in the world, although I wouldn't count on it happening. That'll bring up the Atlanta Falcons at 8. All the quarterbacks are now gone as they select Christian Gonzalez. This pick certainly makes sense. I've seen them linked to Nolan Smith and Bijan Robinson. However, with a premier defensive talent still on the board, I think they'd have a hard time passing up on him. The Chicago Bears are up with the 9th pick, and they select Nolan Smith, which is interesting. wherever you think Nolan Smith is going to go, he's probably going to go earlier than that. I think a lot of teams like him. Again, I've seen him mocked as high as 8 to Atlanta. I know he's been linked with the Falcons. I think everybody expects the Bears to go offensive line, which is possible, but people forget their defense last year was god-awful. They need just about anything. So maybe he's not a natural fit on their defense, but I don't entirely blame them. Lucas Van Ness to the Eagles at 10. This one is an Eagle type of pick. They like to build around the trenches. I'm on the board of them picking Bijan Robinson. I think that's what they should do, but I wouldn't put it past them to do that. Paris Johnson goes to the Titans at 11. That makes a lot of sense. They need offensive line. Paris Johnson's obviously one of the better ones in the class for sure, so that's a pretty easy pick. Osiris Torrance to the Texans at 12. I do like him, but 12 feels a little bit early. I don't think he would go that high. The New York Jets at 13, still no resolve with the Aaron Rodgers situation. They will go back to the offensive line, a third straight offensive line selection as they draft Peter Skoronski from Northwestern. This one makes a lot of sense. He very well could be the top tackle off the board instead of Paris Johnson. I would also throw Darnell Wright out of Tennessee's name into that conversation as well. New England's pick at 14 is interesting because they could look at wide receiver, defensive back, O-line, D-line, and there's value at all of those spots in this range at the draft. So this is one of the most interesting picks of the first round to me. And they picked Jackson Smith-Njigba, who I think is the best receiver in the class. So I have no problem with this selection. I think that would be a nice pick for New England. The Green Bay Packers at 15. What are they going to do? They're going to pick Brian Branch. I think this is plausible. I would expect them, if they go defense, to maybe look on the defensive line. But they did use a first rounder a few years ago on Darnell Savage, and it hasn't entirely worked out, so I guess they could do something similar here. Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame goes to the Commanders. I think Dalton Kincaid probably will be the first tight end off the board, but if it is Mayer, that wouldn't entirely be a major surprise. The Pittsburgh Steelers at 17. They will select Broderick Jones, the tackle out of Georgia. That makes sense. This is probably about where his range is, and the Steelers could use an offensive tackle, really two, if we're being honest. So I don't see a major issue with that pick. That'll bring up the Lions back at number 18. Devin Witherspoon is still on the board, might I add, and he finally goes here to Detroit. So while I really want Anthony Richardson personally, if we walk away with both Tyree Wilson and Devin Witherspoon without having to move any other picks, I think I'd be pretty happy. I think this would be a great haul for the Lions. That'll bring up the Buccaneers here at 19. They're certainly in an interesting spot in a weak NFC South division. Now with Baker Mayfield at quarterback, could they look at a guy like Hendon Hooker here? I wouldn't rule it out, but they go with Joey Porter Jr. I think Porter probably won't be available here because really everybody between 14 and 18 probably would strongly consider him, but he falls to 19, and I think that's a good pick for Tampa Bay. That'll bring up the Seattle Seahawks at 20. They got Jalen Carter earlier, and now they get Quentin Johnston. One of my draft hot takes is that Quentin Johnston does not end up being a first-round pick. I don't mind Seattle picking a receiver here, but I think they'd prefer somebody smaller, a little bit better of a route runner. I've mocked them JSN before. I've had them pick Jordan Addison before. Zay Flowers would also work. So the Dolphins are here at 21. This is kind of weird because the Dolphins pick in real life was forfeited, but I can't really do anything about it. So the Dolphins are just going to pick Brian Brzee instead. Another one of my draft hot takes is that I'm not that high on Brian Brzee. I get the upside. I think he's probably a top 40 player in the draft, but I don't know. I think some of these other interior defensive linemen are a little bit better. The Chargers get Myles Murphy at 22. This is probably around his range. I don't know about the Chargers, though. I don't think they're going to go defensive line early. I would expect either secondary or an offensive skill position player, maybe a guy like Bijan Robinson, who is still on the board. Deonte Banks to Baltimore at 23. This is a grand slam pick. Deonte Banks is really, really good. He's finally gotten the attention he deserves over the last month or two, really since the Combine. I don't think he's on the board here at 23, but if he is, the Ravens run that card up. DeJuan Jones to Minnesota at 24. This pick doesn't really make a lot of sense. They have one of the best tackle duos in the league with Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill, both of whom are locked up on long-term contracts. So I don't think that pick would be a particularly smart one for Minnesota. I think they would look either secondary or maybe Hendon Hooker again. That'll bring up the Jaguars at 25. They go with Anton Harrison out of Oklahoma. I don't know if tackle's the most likely route they go with. I think it's more likely they look into secondary, maybe a pass rusher, but Anton Harrison would be a fine pick here. The Giants here is another one of the more interesting picks in the first round for me, and they select Adetomiwa Adebawore. He's a player who I'm really high on. I think he's really, really good. This is around the range where I think he should go. I think he's really being slept on and could absolutely be a first-round pick. The thing is, the Giants' biggest strength is their interior defensive line, so I don't think he would make a lot of sense for the Giants particularly. That'll bring up Dallas at 26. Could this be the Bijan spot? It is not. They go with Jordan Addison, which I can kind of see this. They did trade for Brandon Cooks, and Jordan Addison is a similar build, but I don't think Brandon Cooks is stopping you from drafting Jordan Addison if you really like him. The Buffalo Bills are here at 27. Could this be the Bijan spot? I don't think it should be. I like James Cook. And they go with Darnell Wright. I think Darnell Wright's going to go in the top half of the first round. I think he could go as high as 9 to Chicago. Another guy wherever you think he's going, I think he's going to go earlier. I think he'd make a lot of sense for the Bills, and if he falls into the early 20s, I think Buffalo would try to move up for him. That'll bring up the Cincinnati Bengals here at 28. A lot of different routes they could go with. And they pick Bijan Robinson. This pick actually kind of makes a little bit of sense. Maybe not so much in the game, because Joe Mixon is really good in Madden Sim, but in real life it does. Obviously, Joe Mixon is the legal problem, so it's unclear if he's going to be back next year. Even if he is, Joe Mixon's 27 years old, which is a little bit older for a running back, and he did show signs of regression last year, and they also lost Samaje Perine. So if Bijan's on the board here, which I would be very surprised with, that'd be a good pick. The Broncos here at 29. Again, this isn't their pick. It's actually New Orleans' pick as part of the Sean Payton trade, so we'll pretend this is New Orleans' selection. And it's Kalijah Kancey, which actually would make a lot of sense for the Saints. I don't think he'll be on the board this late, but if it does happen, then I think New Orleans would be quite happy with it. Or, I guess in this case, Denver. That'll bring up the Philadelphia Eagles here at number 30, their second first-rounder of the day. And they go with Jahmyr Gibbs. I think it's more likely than people think that they would consider Bijan early. I think he's the only running back they would pick in the first round, but Jahmyr Gibbs in that offense would be a lot of fun, so I can't really argue against it. And then Kansas City here at 31, the final pick of the first round. We're only going to go through the first round picks in depth, and then we're going to breeze through the other stuff. They go with Darnell Washington, the tight end out of Georgia. I don't think this pick makes a lot of sense. They have Travis Kelce, who's really good. I don't mind the Chiefs drafting a developmental tight end. I really like Zach Kuntz out of Old Dominion for them in the third round. He's a freak. His relative athletic score at the tight end position is the highest ever. So I think he'd be a perfect guy to groom under Travis Kelce in a couple rounds from now. So that's our first round. Pandemonium, especially at the top, with Will Levis going number 1. CJ Stroud is a Cardinal for whatever reason. So, typical Madden not being the brightest. I feel like this year's draft is very hard to predict, but I think most of our mock drafts are probably going to be better than whatever the hell this is. So we're going to breeze through the other rounds real quickly, take a look at some picks that are notable. So here is the second round. Zay Flowers to the Texans I think would be a pretty fun pick. B.J. Ojulari to the Cardinals will be a solid selection. A lot of edge rushers early here in round 2. Josh Downs staying in NC. He goes to the Panthers. Jalen Hyatt to Cleveland. Keep in mind the Browns don't have that pick anymore. Not a whole lot I could do about that. Hendon Hooker to Washington. I don't think Washington's going to pick a quarterback early, but it is possible. Tyreek Stevenson went towards the middle of the second round. I think he goes in the first round. That's another one of my bold takes. I think he's going to go higher than people think. Tank Dell on the Bengals offense is kind of fun. And obviously they added Bijan too. And then Diane Henley to the Chiefs is a total steal. Into the third round now. A lot of good value picks here early in the round. Tanner McKee to New Orleans. I don't think that's going to happen. They just gave Derek Carr a lot of money, so I don't think they would do that. Devin A-Chain on the Jets would be kind of fun. Pair him up with Breece Hall. Emmanuel Forbes to the Chargers in the third round. I think it's a lot more likely he ends up in the first round, but okay, you do you, EA. Jack Campbell to the Bills. Again, he is not falling this far. If he does, then that would be a total steal. Into the fourth round now. An interesting pick here is Sean Tucker, one of my favorite players in the entire draft, to the Packers. This makes me want to puke. Sean Tucker is a very fun Twitter follow, so if you don't, you should. I highly recommend it. His post-game reports for himself are pretty funny. So I'm not pleased by having Sean Tucker go to the Packers. That would really make me sad. Aiden O'Connell to Detroit. I actually saw a rumor where we were linked to him today. I don't know how I'd feel about it in the fourth round, especially if Israel Abanikanda is on the board. I really like him, the running back out of Pitt. Tank Bigsby as well is also a good value pick. And then Jaron Hall to the Chiefs to wrap up the fourth. Into the fifth, the Colts finally get their quarterback, Clayton Tune. Only 4 rounds too late. Jake Haener is now the best quarterback on the Browns, who's never done anything illegal in a massage room with a woman. Stetson Bennett is a Bear. I mean, Stetson Bennett is a winner, and the Bears don't have a lot of winners, so I guess that kind of makes sense. And then Max Duggan goes to the Bengals towards the end of the round. Into the sixth now, Chase Bryce got drafted. That's something. Okay, he goes to the Bucks. If he ever plays, then he's probably going to win an MVP because the Bucks playbook in this game is pretty OP for quarterbacks. They just put up ridiculous passing numbers. I don't know why. It's kind of just like you're using an air raid playbook in college football. It's like Mike Leach is calling the plays. And then here's the rest of his 6th round. Deuce Vaughn's a pretty fun player. He goes to the Colts and then into the 7th round now. Some interesting picks here. Charlie Jones to the Raiders. I guess Josh McDaniels would do that. It's not necessarily New England, but that's the next best thing if you're a white slot receiver entering the league. And then here are the final few picks of the round. Not as many recognizable names for most people, but some of these guys could end up being pretty good. Jason Taylor II, son of Jason Taylor. And Mr. Irrelevant ends up being the tackle Richard Gurage to the Falcons. Not quite as exciting as last year's Mr. Irrelevant. So here are the lowest and highest rated players in the draft class, and now we are going to simulate to the end of this first season to see who wins the Rookie of the Years, and then we will simulate 20 years into the future to see who goes into the Hall of Fame. So in Super Bowl 58, we had the Chiefs and the Washington Commanders with Hendon Hooker. Okay, Jacoby Brissett led the league in passing too, which is something, although he's not on Washington here, unlike real life. Jackson Smith-Njigba wins the AFC Offensive Rookie of the Year, and then the Defensive Rookie of the Year is Will Anderson. Makes sense. I could certainly see both of those things happening. Then in the NFC, Will Levis wins the Rookie of the Year. He had the same amount of touchdowns as Bryce Young, but he had like a third of the interceptions. So maybe Carolina was cooking when they drafted Will Levis over Bryce. And then the Defensive Rookie of the Year is B.J. Ojulari with the Arizona Cardinals. Not a ton of super high picks at the top. A lot of these first rounders are closer to the bottom. No Christian Gonzalez or Devin Witherspoon in the top 10. And keep in mind that we're both on NFC teams. As for the season recap, Washington won the Super Bowl with Derek Forrest winning the Super Bowl MVP. Okay, that's interesting. So now we're going to simulate 20 years into the future. We're going to see which players end up having really good careers, see which guys end up going into the Hall of Fame. And the data that we got from the simulation was interesting, to say the least. So we have made it to the 2043 season. None of the players drafted in the 2023 draft are still in the league. Here's a look at all of the Super Bowl results and awards and whatnot since then. Ryan Tannehill won a championship with the Vikings, and then that's when things got kind of weird. So the Steelers signed Lamar Jackson and Nick Bosa, and they won not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 Super Bowls within a 6-year stretch. And the other one was won by the Bengals with Bijan Robinson winning the Super Bowl MVP. But yeah, the Steelers pretty much had a dynasty. Jack Campbell won a Super Bowl MVP with Buffalo. Bryce Young wins a ring and a regular season MVP. The Bills lose to the Packers that time. The Raiders win a championship. The Raiders win another championship. The Rams demolish the Broncos. Dallas wins one. Buffalo wins again. The Raiders have 6 championships now. Cleveland even wins one. Buffalo gets another one and 4. So Buffalo won 4 Super Bowls in this 20-year stretch, while the Steelers won 5. So in terms of some of the career leaders, Bryce Young is 5th all-time in passing yards. I think he spent his entire career with the Texans. 4th in passing touchdowns. Bijan Robinson is 3rd in rushing touchdowns. JSN is 10th in receiving yards. A lot of recognizable names here. Jerry Rice is still in 1st. Shout out to Chris Godwin, though. He had an unbelievable career. JSN was 8th in receiving touchdowns, and Tank Dell was in 9th. And then Quentin Johnston was 8th in catches. Everybody says this receiver class sucks, but Madden thinks otherwise. Nobody made the sack list, but I want to point out that Nick Bosa had 299 career sacks. Yeah. Tank Dell had 23 receiving touchdowns in a season, which tied the current record, but the actual record now belongs to Devontae Smith, who had 25 receiving touchdowns in a year. As for the Hall of Famers, we had quite a few in this class, none of whom are better than Nick Bosa, who has a legacy score of around 62,000 with his near 300 sacks and 5 Super Bowls with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Bryce Young is the highest finisher here, the second best one in the draft class. We have to scroll quite a bit. A lot of interesting names in this range, but it ends up being Will Anderson, which is certainly possible. And then we have Tank Dell. What a career for Nathaniel Dell. He won a championship with the Bengals. There's Jackson Smith-Njigba. He's a Hall of Famer. The next one in the draft class, we had to continue to scroll, but it's Quentin Johnston. So clearly this receiver class is pretty good. I just passed Bijan Robinson. He made the Hall of Fame. And then I believe we had one more, Anthony Richardson. So some pretty predictable names here, other than Tank Dell. That one's certainly a surprise, but good for him, I guess. So that'll wrap up the episode. Let me know what you thought of this little experiment down below in the comment section. Would you guys like to see me do something similar in NBA 2K once we get closer to the NBA draft? Again, make sure to subscribe to my second channel. The link is in the description if you enjoy the NFL draft content or want to hear me talk about real sports and whatnot over there. I'm probably going to have another draft-related video on this channel as well, probably the day of the draft as well. So, yeah, that's the plan, Stan.